Tales from the Manor. For condensed and reimagined tales of horror, suspense, sci-fi, and a dabble of fantasy. From the horror shelf, I bring you A Debt for the Professor. Professor Ronson loved his job. Every day he got to step into a world where knowledge and curiosity collide. It's a place where he could inspire and be inspired. Teaching at Bluestone University had always been a joy. The campus, with its historic charm and serene nighttime ambience, felt like a second home to him. There's just something about the old brick buildings and the eager young moldable minds. Each student brings a unique perspective, which opens up opportunities for many lively discussions. Professor Ronson's favorite course to teach was world mythologies. It was a subject that allowed him to delve into the rich tapestry of human imagination and culture. He found a thrill in sharing ancient tales of gods and monsters with his students. These stories were not just myths. They were windows into the human soul, reflecting our deepest fears and highest aspirations. The classroom, with its worn wooden desks and flickering fluorescent lights, transformed into a stage. It was a place where history came alive and the past and present intertwined. Professor Ronson became a storyteller, weaving magic with his words and transporting his students to distant lands and forgotten eras. His passion was obvious, and it ignited a spark in his students. One chilly evening in January, the air crackled with anticipation. The winter night was crisp and the campus was cloaked in a serene silence, broken only by the occasional crunch of footsteps on snow. A new semester had begun. The promise of new beginnings and fresh opportunities hung in the air, and Professor Ronson was ready to embrace it all. He was eager to dive into the world of myths and legends with a fresh batch of students. Each new class was a chance to explore the depths of human creativity and to challenge the boundaries of our understanding. He adjusted his spectacles, a familiar ritual that signaled the start of another journey into the unknown, and glanced over the faces in the room. Each one held a story, a potential waiting to be unlocked. Most seemed bright and eager, typical freshmen excited to be there. Their eyes sparkled with the promise of new knowledge and the thrill of discovery. But there was one student, seated in the back, who sent an unexplainable shiver down the professor's spine. There was something about his presence that felt out of place, a shadow in the midst of light. The new student was a young man, almost swallowed by his oversized hooded sweatshirt. He sat hunched, his face obscured by the shadows of the hood. Professor Ronson tried to catch his eye to offer a welcoming smile, but the student remained hidden. As the class progressed, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease emanating from the back of the room. He continued to scan the faces of his students, engaging them in discussions about Greek mythology, but his gaze always returned to the enigmatic figure in the back. Something about the student's presence disturbed him, a feeling he couldn't quite place. Days turned into weeks, and the new student, whose name on the roster was Ethan, remained an enigma. He rarely spoke, only offering mumbled responses when called upon directly. Yet Professor Ronson noticed something peculiar. Whenever Ronson looked up, he would find Ethan staring at him. It wasn't a typical student's gaze filled with curiosity or boredom. This gaze was different. Ethan's eyes seemed to bore into Professor Ronson, cold and unsettling. It was as if the young man was studying him, analyzing his every move. The intensity of his stare sent chills down the professor's spine. Professor Ronson's world mythology class was held in the evening. As the semester progressed and the days grew shorter, the class often ended after nightfall. The walk to the parking lot was always eerie during the winter months. The old trees swayed in the wind, their branches casting long, dancing shadows across the pavement. On several occasions, as the professor made his way to his car, he could have sworn he saw a figure lurking in the shadows. Each time he would turn, heart pounding, only to find nothing but the wind rustling through the leaves. Had it been Ethan, he wondered, or maybe his own imagination playing tricks on him? But the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if invisible eyes were constantly tracking his every move, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The sensation was such that he often found himself glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there, only to be met with empty shadows. Professor Ronson couldn't shake the sensation that Ethan was following him. It wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a persistent, gnawing feeling that burrowed deep into his psyche. Every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the wind outside his window seemed to whisper Ethan's name. On several evenings as he drove home from the university, he'd glimpse a dark figure in his rearview mirror, walking a distance behind his car. The figure was always just far enough away to be indistinct, a shadowy silhouette that gave him chills and sent his imagination into overdrive. He'd grip the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white with tension. The figure would disappear whenever he slowed down or tried to get a better look. It was as if it knew when he was watching, vanishing into the night like a ghost. This only added to his growing paranoia, making him question his own sanity. Sleep offered little respite. Nightmares plagued the professor. Each night he would toss and turn, his mind unable to escape the relentless torment. The dreams were vivid and terrifying, leaving him exhausted and on edge. Visions of ancient creatures ripped from the pages of his mythology books tormented him. These weren't just figments of his imagination. They felt real, as if they had clawed their way out of the ancient texts and into his mind. The forest in his dreams was dark and foreboding, filled with the whispers of long-forgotten legends. Ethan's face, pale and gaunt, with those unnervingly intense eyes, began to appear in his dreams. Ethan's eyes seemed to bore into Professor Ronson's soul, filled with a haunting intensity that left him paralyzed with fear. It was as if he was trying to communicate something, a message that Ronson couldn't quite grasp. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of dread clinging to him like a shroud. His heart would be pounding, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving him trapped in a waking terror that he couldn't escape. One particularly cold February night, as Professor Ronson was leaving the classroom, he felt a chill run down his spine. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and listened intently. Silence. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the hallway and made his way towards the parking lot. The parking lot was mostly empty. The wind howled through the trees, their branches swaying ominously in the darkness. As he reached his car, Professor Ronson froze. The driver's side door was ajar. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. When he peered inside, he saw nothing unusual, other than the fact that the door had been ajar. He got in, and right before turning on the ignition, Ronson let out a gasp. He saw in his rearview mirror someone sit up in the back seat on the driver's side. It was Ethan! Ethan had been waiting for him in his car. With a crackle in his voice, the professor yelled out, "Ethan, what are you doing in my car? I thought you were out of town. How did you even get in here?" Ethan leaned forward slowly, a strange smile spreading across his pale face. It was a smile that sent chills down Professor Ronson's spine, a smile that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. His eyes, usually hidden in shadow, gleamed in the dim light. They were eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, eyes that held a depth of emotion that was both captivating and terrifying. He leaned forward even more, his voice a low whisper that seemed to slither through the cold air. "I've been waiting for this moment, Professor," he said, his words dripping with a sinister intent. "You have an overdue debt to pay." Professor Ronson sat still, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the cold sweat forming on his forehead, his mind racing to comprehend the situation. Ethan's eyes held a terrifying intensity, his gaze unwavering. It was as if he could see right through Ronson, reading his every thought and fear. Fear, primal and consuming, washed over Professor Ronson. He had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. The air around him seemed to grow colder, the darkness pressing in. He turned to exit the car, but it was too late. Ethan's hand shot out from the shadows of the back seat. It was a swift, predatory movement, and before Ronson could react, he felt Ethan's grip tighten around his arm. "Professor, do you remember your trip to Ontario 7 years ago, where you took advantage of a young local woman and left her for dead?" Professor Ronson yelled, "No!" then let out a scream as he felt the searing pain in his arm. And then swiftly, Ethan's other hand gripped his throat. "Professor, that was Amelia, my sister, and she sends me with a simple 3-word message: you die tonight." Ronson was unable to speak, but he thought of the irony. He'd always wanted to visit Ontario, but was never able to go. His vision blurred, his bowels released, and then everything went black. The last thing Professor Ronson heard was Ethan's chilling laughter echoing off the frosted windows in the isolated darkness of his own car. If you enjoyed this tale, I think you'll enjoy this one as well.